Hi, and welcome to the Sales Professional Level 4 Apprenticeship. This is just an introduction to the qualification to give you a basic understanding of its structure and the assessment strategy for it. So, what is an apprenticeship? An apprenticeship traditionally was to offer younger learners the opportunity to start a career in a particular field where they hadn't worked before. However, apprenticeships have been reformed, and there's a lot of learners who are of any age, but they usually still will be changing role in some way or another. So it could be career changers, it could be gaining extra responsibilities. The apprenticeship provides a structured path for you to move into that field or to take on that extra responsibility. So first of all, it allows you that title of being a learner and the expectation that you're still learning the role. And because it's competency based, we look to support you in gaining these skills in a more formal way that might be overlooked if it's done with an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship standards are developed with stakeholders from industry and training. So this means that a group of representatives from industry and training got together to identify the competencies which would be expected for someone to be working in a sales role. And so they'll write them down. They created a list, and to complete this apprenticeship, you have to put together a portfolio of evidence which proves that you can actually perform those skills to a competent level in the workplace. And that's what it means by vocational or competency based. If we compare it to college or university, and those sort of qualifications, you would be reading from a book or attending a class or lecture, learning some knowledge, and then you'd sit an exam or write an essay based on that information which you'd learned. Whereas in this qualification, it is assessing your ability to actually perform these competencies in the workplace, and that's where the value of this qualification comes from. So, sales executive, it's fairly straightforward as to the sort of role that would be involved in this qualification. It's for people who work with customers, primarily for people who lead the end-to-end sales interaction with the customer and manage sales internally within their organisation. And they're responsible for identifying, gaining, and growing the existing customer base, and also for developing relationships with customers with the goal of increasing sales. And they're usually the single point of contact for the customer with that organisation. Salespeople have to have a firm understanding of your organisation's products and services and how that can suit different customers' needs. So, what will you get out of this qualification? First of all, you'll gain a level 4 apprenticeship in sales, which is a recognised qualification that can be added to your CV. You'll also be able to apply for professional sales certification at level 4 with the Institute of Sales Professionals certification framework. You'll also gain your functional skills in level 2 in maths and English. And you'll also have a portfolio of evidence which demonstrates your competence in your role. And that can help if it comes to things like interviews. In terms of progression, upon completion of this qualification, you'll be able to progress into a career within your industry, so within sales. However, there are other options as well when it comes to training. So you could aim to do a high level apprenticeship, perhaps a level 5 qualification. You could look to go and complete a degree apprenticeship, so that's an apprenticeship at an even higher level. You could look to complete a business related undergraduate degree, and the entry requirements will depend on the institution which you're applying for. You could look to complete a business related professional qualification, so say you went into sales management, perhaps you'd want to complete a level 4 or level 5 qualification with the Chartered Management Institute. And you can also specialise within your role, so it's not necessarily a case of being promoted, but it could be specialising perhaps with a particular customer base, within a particular product, or within a particular field such as a bid writer. If we look at the qualification framework to see what level this qualification is at, it is a level 4 apprenticeship, so it's at RQF level 4, and that is the equivalent of a higher national certificate or year 1 of a degree. It's worth noting that this framework doesn't show credits. Credits are the number of learning hours. 1 credit is equivalent to 10 learning hours to gain that qualification. So it doesn't show you the size, but it does show you the level of difficulty. And that's what it can be compared to. So now we're looking at the standards. So that is the KSBs, or the knowledge, skills and behaviours. If you're putting together a portfolio of evidence, these are the points which you're proving that you can perform in the workplace. So they're all here. You can also find more detail than this in the endpoint assessment strategy, which outlines this in a lot of detail. But what we're aiming to do is just go through the overview to give you an idea. So we're looking to train you, and also to show that you're competent in being able to understand the market, understand your customer, propose and present solutions, negotiate, close sales, gather intelligence. And there's also a number of behaviours there, like self-discipline and resilience, which we also aim to develop and show that you've improved upon as part of this qualification. So that will give you an idea of what training you'll receive, and also what your assessments will be on. The expected duration for this apprenticeship is 18 to 24 months. That can vary. Some learners will get through this qualification quicker, and some learners may take longer. So we can change the expected end date, and if there's good reason, it can extend beyond the 24 months. But typically, a learner will take about 18 to 24 months to complete this qualification. The qualification is split into 3 phases. The first is on programme, and this is sometimes referred to as learning and assessment, because the 2 things that you complete during that stage is learning activities and assessment activities. And this is typically the longest phase of the apprenticeship journey. Once you've completed that, you'd move on to Gateway. Gateway is essentially a check to ensure you meet the requirements of endpoint assessment. And once that's been completed, you would then finally move on to endpoint assessment. In this stage is where you complete those assessments which determine your grade and determine your competency. And for endpoint assessment, you'll be allocated an independent endpoint assessor to complete those assessments. So when you start the programme, you will get a skills coach and assessor who will take you through on programme and gateway stage. But at the point where you move on to endpoint assessment, you'll be allocated an independent endpoint assessor to conduct those assessments. So let's go through by starting with the on-programme learning. So the first part is the planning stage. At this point, your assessor will show you how to use the ePortfolio system. They'll go through the structure of the qualification. They'll explain how you'd go about producing your evidence and ensure that you're happy with that. You'd then look to produce an individual learning and assessment plan, and this is essentially a list of learning activities and assessment activities which is specific to both yourself and your prior skills and experience, and also to your role, as every learner and every job is different. So you'll spend a bit of time putting this plan together, and that will help guide the assessments and the training which you'll complete. So based on that plan, you'll then complete training. Some training may be a standard, so for example, a delivery model for sales might involve attending a few workshops based around sales topics. If that's the case, that's going to be the same for everyone on that programme. However, there will still be learning activities assigned that's specific to you. It's a requirement of this qualification that you spend 20% of your time completing off-the-job training. So off-the-job training is learning which happens outside your normal day-to-day working environment, and it allows you to increase your competency in your role. So it should be relevant to your role, but it's not just a case of doing that task 100 times to become more competent at it. It's the actual training that's involved to show you how to do it, not just repeating the same task over and over again. Your off-the-job training is logged in your journal, and your journal is essentially a tracker of all the training activities which you've completed. And that's something that you'll keep up to date to show that you've completed that training. So you start off with the training because you've got to learn. You start this programme having typically changed roles, so you're less competent than someone who's experienced. You then learn to improve your competency, and once you're then competent, you'd then complete an assessment. An assessment would be some form of evidence that looks to show you're competent performing that task in the workplace. And so you'll produce that portfolio which will demonstrate your competency at performing those KSBs which we've looked at. In addition to the portfolio of evidence, you'll also look to achieve your level 2 in functional skills in maths and English. If you've already got this, it will be assessed by recognised prior learning, and if you haven't received it, your assessor will go through the training plan and the assessments to complete that part of the qualification. So that phase takes about 12 to 18 months, at which point you'll reach Gateway. Gateway is essentially a check to make sure that you're ready to progress on to that endpoint assessment. And it is essentially an evaluation and a discussion between the learner, so yourself, your mentor, so that's a representative from your employer, and your assessor, so a representative from your training provider. It is typically employer-led, and that they are the ones that would make the final decision. It is a prerequisite at this stage that you have spent a minimum of 12 months on programme, so you can't complete the apprenticeship any sooner, and that you've also achieved the requirements of the Gateway stage. So those requirements are that you've got a portfolio of evidence mapped against your KSBs. You've also achieved your functional skills in maths and English at level 2. And it's also during this stage that you'd complete a mock endpoint assessment. That would both help prepare you for your endpoint assessments, but also give us some guide as to whether you're ready or not. And it's only once everyone has agreed that you're ready to complete and move on to the endpoint assessment that you'd move on to that final stage. So this then moves us on to the endpoint assessment. So the endpoint assessment will assess the full range of knowledge, skills and behaviours listed in the published standard using a presentation and a portfolio of evidence combined with a professional discussion. So those are the endpoint assessments that you'll complete. So you've got those two endpoint assessments. And it's not your portfolio of evidence that you put together during your on-programme phase that determines your competence and your score. What happens with your portfolio is that it's used as a tool to base your endpoint assessments off of. So it's not the portfolio itself that proves you're competent, it's these endpoint assessments which are based around that portfolio. So the first endpoint assessment is the work-based project. So this project should be completed after the Gateway stage. At Gateway, it should be agreed with both your employer and the endpoint assessor the title for this project and the scope of it. A template will then be provided by the endpoint assessor as a framework for the apprentice to use to ensure that the project includes evidence of how the KSBs have been applied with real customers in a work-based context. So that guide allows the link to be made between the actual task itself and it links at the end to the KSBs to show that they have been covered. You'll have approximately 10 weeks to complete the project and you must submit it to the independent endpoint assessor at the end of those 10 weeks. The word count for the final project is 5,000 words plus or minus 10%, and that doesn't include any annexes or references. And a typical structure for this work-based project includes the objectives for sales planning and preparation, your organisational knowledge in its context, understanding your customers' requirements, markets and challenges, proposing and presenting solutions and options, understanding of sales approaches and rationale in your organisation, reflection on customer discussions and decisions to feedback to organisations, and then you've got your conclusion and learning outcomes for ongoing professional development. So that gives you an idea of the structure of the project which you'll be completing for that particular assessment. So now look at the second endpoint assessment. This is the presentation. So the endpoint assessor will provide you with a brief to guide you about how this presentation can be structured. You can include physical or digital material in your presentation, so that might be a flip chart or a PowerPoint presentation. The presentation will involve a 10-minute presentation plus a 15-minute question and answer session, and it can vary by up to 10% if additional time is required at the discretion of the endpoint assessor. So a typical breakdown of it would be a 10-minute sales pitch of the apprentice's organisation, products and or services, demonstrating how they positively differentiate their products and services, 5-minute explanation of how they prepare for a sales pitch, and then that 15-minute question and answer session, which is around specific points that the independent endpoint assessor wishes to explore with you in relation to your pitch. And then the third endpoint assessment is a professional discussion supported by a portfolio of evidence. Professional discussion is basically a chat where they will talk through your portfolio of evidence. It's structured by lasting around 50 minutes. The first 25 minutes is the discussion, and then there's the 25-minute question and answer session. And so the discussion will be where we'll look at the portfolio, and the assessor will ask questions based on that. So why did you do it this way? What might you do differently? Can you talk me through this particular situation based on that evidence which you've provided? And then the last bit would be the follow-up question and answers to ensure that the full range of KSBs have been covered. Those 3 endpoint assessments will contribute towards your overall grade for this qualification. So you can pass this qualification if you do particularly well in the endpoint assessment. You can also receive a distinction, and the breakdown of these grades can be seen in detail in the endpoint assessment strategy guide. So let's have a look just to summarise for the learner journey to bring this all together. So we would start off by producing a plan and producing your individual training and assessment plan. You would then complete some training. So you complete training in terms of the workplace around sales, and you complete training on your functional skills. And both of those types of training are logged in your journal. Once you've completed the workplace training and become competent in performing these skills in the workplace, you would then produce your portfolio of evidence. So that's your on-program assessment, and that is added to your portfolio. Once this has been completed, you then move on to the gateway stage, which is a check, and the requirements are there to ensure that you're ready to move on to that endpoint assessment. And once you're prepared for it, you can then be allocated an independent endpoint assessor and proceed to complete your 3 endpoint assessments. So hopefully this makes it clear in terms of the qualification, how it's assessed, and the journey from starting the programme to gaining your qualification.